Today, Dave Pendle's going to be our guest facilitator, guest and facilitator. So what do you got for us today?
Yeah, well, I think I'm sort of bringing a different emphasis to what I normally encounter in the leadership domain. And I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the first person perspective today. And also what that reveals, or what might be in the blind spot of leadership that could be pointing us in new directions. So that's the kind of overview. And very much I feel authorized to speak because I've lived all of this. So everything that's in there I've lived through, or it deeply resonates in my experience, and therefore I think I embody it to a degree that communicates and imparts something different to a lot of what I normally encounter.
Awesome. And the reason I'm excited about hearing Dave's conversation is, you know, we like to take different perspectives on, you know, what leadership means and find better ways to see it, better lenses to see it with. And so Dave feels really strongly about some areas that he wants to pursue, and I'm really anxious to hear how they align to what we're thinking or shift what we're thinking, all of those things. And while we're giving people a few more minutes to join in, I just want to do the commercial right now. So I'll put in the chat here the link to the Voices calendar, and remind everyone that the 20th, next week, we have what was supposed to be our final session with Bob Anderson. Bob was the founder of something called the Leadership Circle, which is a well thought of way of understanding who leaders are and what leaders do, and measuring that in a 360 type of thing. And he's going to share with us, you know, that's his history, so to speak, but where he is now, the edge he's at now, and the thing that he cares about now is really about some of these higher level perspectives on who we are in our consciousness, and this idea of unity and existing as a system. And so we're anxious to hear what his thoughts are on those things. But we also have a surprise addition. Robert Fritz, who has come a few times, going to come back and join us on the 30th, because we've heard a lot about his idea of creative process in the disciplines around creating, but kind of surrounding that is his idea of structure and structural consulting. And so we're going to explore what he means by those things in a little more depth. So I don't think we've ever heard this from him, and so we're anxious to hear that part of his story. So it'll be on the 30th, and then we will take a break for the summer. So I think we're all here, Dave, and you wanted to kick us off right from the get-go. This is your show. I'm here to run the Zoom.
Well, thanks very much, Tom. And I'm going to, have you given me permission to share the screen?
You do have permission to share the screen.
Yeah.
I also just make you a co-host, so you have permission for everything.
Okay, great. Firstly, just thank you. I'm feel very privileged and honored to be sharing my perspectives on leadership in this series. And the reason that I keep coming back is partly what you said in your introduction, is there's so many different perspectives being offered in this series, and lenses and ways of looking at leadership, that I find the living inquiry into the topic energizing and thrilling, and also mind expanding at times. So just a thanks for that, and thanks for this opportunity. So I just wanted to point to the title and just offer a little disclaimer. This isn't going to be a rigorously argued, logical, linear process of convincing you about clarity on leadership, but I'm more creating pointers, prompters, invitations to consider leadership from potentially some new, or for some of you, they might not be new, but to consider it in the light of the whole presentation that I'm bringing to you. And what I'm highlighting, as I said at the outset in response to Tom's question, is I'm really highlighting today the first person perspective on leadership from the individual. So everything that I'm bringing to you today, I've lived through, or I have understanding of, or it's integrated into my experience, rather than this is a subject that I've studied, that I've got a lot of knowledge about. So I think that brings in a slightly different quality and emphasis on the first person perspective. So today's we're going to have a little form. It's similar to previous forms of in the Prometheus discussions and dialogues. We're going to go into a little bit of presencing. Then we're going to do a collective exploration. Then I'm going to do about a 30-minute presentation. Then we'll have group discussions, small group discussions, have a plenary and harvest. And Tom's already done more about Prometheus. So unless there's anything else you want to add, we can pitch that in after the second discussion, Tom. If there's any new speakers you've added while this is happening, perhaps.
You never know.
Yeah, we never know, right? So I'd like to invite you. This is a little exercise in becoming present. And I'd like to invite you to feel comfortable with your feet on the ground, wherever you're located, or sitting or standing, and to sense into the feelings of your body in this moment. So to sense into your feet on the ground, your breath, the movement of the breath in and out of the lungs and the nose, the circulation of the blood, the sensations of the tingling of your skin, the connection with the air or your clothing. Just feel and sense into this living system that you are. And then I'm going to invite you to cast your mind back to a month ago, when this living system was having a very different interaction in the world, probably. And there was a different resonance and harmony and presence in the world. And I want you to cast your mind back, if there's an impression that you can relate to, and then bring that impression with you into the room from the past right now. So bringing that first impression of you a month ago, or a lingering impression of you a month ago, calling it back. And then do the same thing for a week ago. The person that you are last week is probably a little different or very different from the person you are now, depending on what you were doing last week. So bring that impression into your consciousness and into the room right now. And then likewise this morning, or this morning when you awoke, before you came into this room, what was the impression then? Try and get a sense of the energy and come in. And then the energy on entry. And then bring that into the now. And then extending into the future, maybe your plans after this meeting. Bringing that impression and projection back. And maybe further into the week, bringing that back. So all of those harmonics and presentations and representations of you, bringing them together and focusing in the room, coming back to the body, the whole system that is the body, the heart, the lungs, the breath, the circulation, the sensing, the listening, the feeling. All of those parts are here, whole and complete, right now, present right now to this moment. And also, none of those parts is what makes up you right now. All of those impressions, all of those senses and feelings, your thoughts, your psyche, that doesn't make up the totality of you. So there's something unique and mysterious about your presence here right now. So and let's just rest there for a moment. And I invite you to come back and open your eyes or turn your camera on, and I'll proceed with the next steps. Thanks for cooperating. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll come back to this exercise throughout the presentation. So what I wanted to share with you is three important components that are, in my experience, that have contributed to giving me the confidence to step into a leadership forum where some of the best known names in this world also have presented. So what are the sources I'm drawing on? What's the leadership that I'm drawing on that gives me a kind of ability to share with you this first person perspective on leadership? So one of the things that I did in my career for 25 years was working in England with young people and young adults that were struggling in society. They had extreme problems, they had no parents, they couldn't connect with society. And so in working in that field, I worked face-to-face with young people, I managed services, I did service development initiatives, quality initiatives, all in the third sector, or non-profit sector, also innovation programs, training and learning programs, and also leadership programs. And most of the latter were for the staff to help them improve their services to young people. And I would posit to you that these young people actually exist in the blind spot of society. They live on the margins, they're overlooked, their services are unfunded or cut, or they're given, just because they don't have those parental anchors or mentors in the world, they struggle, but they're overlooked. And working with them, I feel that you have to have a degree of self-mastery to interact in that world, to not burn out and not overgive, but also have a sense of yourself, a resilient sense of self. So this is one of the components that I've enacted in my own life that's still living in me today. Another element and dimension is that for 15 years, alongside some of that, overlapping with that career, I did intensive exploration of spirituality, intensive exploration in terms of going on lengthy retreats, silent retreats, physical practices, also spiritual dialogues, exploring collective consciousness, and also interacting with some of the global change makers in the field, and trying to understand what does it mean to live according to the best of the spiritual experience in the living circumstances of the 21st century, to try to live a contemporary spirituality that was fully engaged in the world, but also privileged and understood the huge endeavor of spirituality in human history, but in a modern non-institutional, non-denominational way. So I feel I reached and expanded the limits of human experience in terms of bliss and horror from all angles. So I've experienced this full spectrum of human experiences. And so because I've had the privilege of that, I feel I've developed a certain amount of inner wisdom and confidence from the extent and breadth of those experiences. And lastly, relevant also to today's talk, I did an MA dissertation in 2010-12 on leadership, and I wasn't convinced by what I was reading in mainstream leadership writing and offerings on the subject. Not a lot of what I read translated into my own experience. So I was interested in finding an alternative way to explore, and I found hermeneutic interpretive phenomenology as a way to interrogate my data. And I interviewed leaders doing non-ordinary leadership development, not mainstream leadership development. And I think that is also part of the different or unusual perspectives that I'm bringing into this leadership forum today. Some of what I'm doing today is still based on some of the recognitions I had doing that dissertation. So before I go further, we want to do a little, I'm going to just turn this off so I can see everybody. We're just going to do a little exploration, shared exploration. And I want you to think of, we're going to do it at first in pairs, then in fours, and then as a big group. Tom, do the numbers work out to that? I'm not scanning the numbers at the moment. I'm just copying something to put in.
If you're in a group, we're in an even number. So I'm ready to break us up.
Yeah, I'll be in a group. Okay, good. So what I want you to consider is what leadership qualities or capacities are most alive for you in recent history. It could be today, it could have been yesterday or last week, or it could be something that's drawing your attention and engaging you and making you want to discover more. Or it could be a question that's just formed or just forming. So
say one more time. What's the inquiry?
I'm just putting it in the chat, and so take a minute. So I will go into it in a moment. I'll explain it one more time. Take a minute and write down, in terms of your own leadership qualities and characteristics, what's been manifesting most powerfully for you recently. Then you'll go into a pair and decide together in a very brief amount of time, something like 2 minutes, 3 things that you both resonate with or that are prevalent for you. And then you'll go into a 4 for slightly longer and decide amongst you the 3 qualities or capacities that are most prevalent. And then we'll come back and each group can feed that back. So any questions on that?
So the one of 2, 4 in all is they should take some time right now to put their thoughts together and write their own perspectives down.
So we'll give you a minute to write your own perspectives down before you go into the dialogue. After that minute, Tom will put you in the breakout room in your pair. And I'm curious what happened in each of the 4s and what you'd like to share.
I can start.
Thanks, Adam.
So in our 5, I think there were people raising different things about what they thought was good leadership, what they thought was perceived as bad leadership, and we were talking about what is the difference between perception and reality. And one person's perception is not another person's reality. You know, and I think in particular we were talking about, you know, we were thinking empowerment, partnership can be seen as good leadership, whereas red tape, power play, things like that can be seen as more negative types of leadership. And I think what we're trying to do is, from my perception anyway, if you call it perception, is try to, how can we emphasize the better modes of leadership?
Okay. Sounds healthy. Another group? Oh, anyone else in that group want to add to what Adam said?
To be fair, we did a really good job of summarizing and making Adam the leader and saying, here, talk about this. So
well delegated, Robin, as well.
A stellar example of leadership, Robin.
thank you.
Okay, the second room, I think there was 3 rooms altogether. Yeah.
So I
It
can
was us.
Oh, Tiffany, yeah.
It was us. Nobody said anything. So here's where we actually ended up. So we started talking about, from a personal perspective, things like kindness, compassion, and drive. And we kind of meandered along to things like what's important to leadership, like dialogue and inquiry. Then we talked about things like interdependence. Jose said, you know, to lead from a place of power, you don't take other people's views. We spoke about how to actually jump into other people's shoes, how to just be authentic. And then we talked very linearly about moving from a place of dependence to independence to then interdependence. And the whole time I was thinking about things like, well, where the heck do things like contradictions and absurdities and ambiguities and paradoxes, where do they fall in the mix? And then that was about the end of time.
Thanks for that, Tiffany. Your summaries are brilliant. Each time you've done a summary, it's been so precise. I've really enjoyed them. But the last point you make is really connects. I mean, there's quite a lot in what's been said connects to the presentation. But what were the last you said? Ambiguities, absurdities, and paradoxes.
And contradictions.
And contradictions. In a way, unless you're really investigating leadership to a deep degree, often I find, and what I've seen in the common approaches to leadership, those things are avoided, partly because they don't necessarily fit easily into a particular way of if you're going to model or you're going to create a map for somebody else. Those aren't easy to express and explore. And often the hidden or the unvoiced or the most marginalized or the unspoken or the wordless, these are all qualities that I sense myself that are in the blind spot, but aren't really amenable to a kind of scientific analysis or a scientific rationalist-based approach. So I'm going to now switch. Thanks everybody for your contributions. This was great to hear everybody's voices or the representation of your voices. And hopefully that lays a ground and I can refer back to some of the contributions as we go through my presentation. This will be
Dave, we haven't heard from your group yet.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm going to call on Katerina or Stephen to speak for our group. Thanks for reminding me, Tom.
Stephen, do you want to summarize?
I was just going to ask you because you did it so beautifully during the group during the threes. Do you want to make a start?
I try to synthesize it as well as Tiffany did. Yeah, sorry, I'm blank. I'm thinking about a whole bunch of things and I'm not able to do it. Stephen, do you want to maybe start?
Yeah, let's do it together. Yeah, so I think there was some really interesting stuff that bubbled to the surface in our conversation, and one of them that I found fascinating was around making, just a general sort of point about making leadership more accessible. And so it's not just focused on a particular elite or a particular group with particular backgrounds, but making it much more accessible, to a much wider cohort. And that sort of really resonated and felt really alive to talk about that. There was another piece, I think, in our group around, giving ourselves a break. And, there's and I particularly liked the sort of presencing moment beforehand as I was going from 1 month to 1 week to 1 day to 1 hour ago. I felt myself go through almost very many different personalities. It's been so many different, moments across those different time perspectives, but being gentle on ourselves, because at some of those times there are difficulties, and they might be difficulties we've faced 1,000 times, but when there's when we're under pressure, just being able to, be gentle. And so that was, perhaps being not very articulate, but I think that was one of the points. And then finally, there was a piece around both empathy, the need for empathy and for creativity, and this ability to be able to create shared visions. And that comes from, or in part comes from really, using empathy and helping people to focus on health and well-being, so they can bring their own complexities and whole selves to a particular task, but also through being able to tell compelling stories and help people to buy into shared visions. So I might have missed something, so please put the icing on the cake, if you will.
Well, no, you actually gave me the linchpin for it, which is empathy, because I think that's what the three of us all talked about, but in slightly different ways, right? It's empathy for ourselves. It's, which you touched on. It's empathy for the situation, the context, and allowing ourselves to really experience that context. So that's an empathy for self, but it's a slightly different interpretation for me anyways. And then also empathy for our audience, the people that we're working with, and how do we connect better to them. So I think that's sort of what all three of us talked about, but we talked about it all in slightly different ways. So that to me was actually the common factor. Great.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen and Katerina and all the other groups. Is there anything before we move on? Anyone else would like to chip in or add?
Yes,
before we...
yes. I just, yes, Genevieve. I wanted to add two things that we also said in our breakout room. It's about reflectivity. It's important to take a step back and be able to reflect. And it's very important. And to add to what Katarina said, I like the empathy thing.
What is there?
I like the empathy thing, but can you hear me?
There's a little bit of noise in the background, but we could hear empathy, your last word.
I like the empathy thing, but I will add the self-compassion. It's important to be able to be self-compassionate as well. And just one word we added at the end was to use the metaphor of the mirror. You know, I am because you are, like Ubuntu. You know, it's very important. So I'm complete.
Thanks, Gian. Not quite sure how to say your name. Thanks for that. And
that's okay.
I love. How do you say it?
Genevieve.
Jean-Olivier. Jean-Olivier.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And I think the notion of Ubuntu is really, really beautiful. It's much proclaimed in Western civilizations, but I think we understand and have access to it less than we should. And hopefully taking a first-person perspective in the way that I'm presenting it today might provide us with a little bit more access to that Ubuntu experientially. So I'm going to go back now and deliver my presentation. It will take something like 30 minutes. Then we'll do the group discussions and then we'll do the harvest. So just going to bring the PowerPoint back up. So we've just been through this. So I'm sure everybody in the room, without exception, has seen this model, the iceberg model. And I've had one before that had lots of different layers, but I found it a bit distracting to talk about because the layers are kind of, then you want to know what goes where. But the iceberg, if you're less familiar with it, the iceberg model represents the lived experience in an organization, where the tip of the iceberg is what's known, what's done, what's commonly worked upon. And the winds might force the iceberg, the winds of change or the winds of circumstance might force the iceberg in different direction, but the mass of the iceberg lies underwater. And the mass of the iceberg is directed by the currents of the ocean, by the unseen currents of the ocean. And often these are like social and cultural agreements of which we're less conscious. Or it could be a culture that's well developed in an established organization, and that's the way we do things here, but everybody's forgotten why, or everybody's forgotten the purpose or use of those agreements. And then as you descend down the model at the bottom, often what's talked about at the bottom are the hidden assumptions or the mental models, worldviews, mindsets that inform human behavior or our own behavior, I would say before thought. It's actually, they're not often understood or not often explored. So this lies at the bottom of the iceberg. You could also say for the iceberg of society, the young people I worked with were in this iceberg, in this hidden part, because they were less understood and less seen, but also the paradigmatic assumptions of the civilization that we're in at the moment lie here. So a lot of what we're, how we're acting in the world, how we're interfacing the world, is informed by these structures, unseen structures at the bottom of the iceberg. So I just want to offer to you that in the next slide, I'm going to show you something you're probably also familiar with, and this is the donut model. So what I'm suggesting here is that there's the blind spot of Western civilization largely is producing these unwanted consequences that we don't seem to be able to reverse. We don't seem to be able to put any limits on. And if you look at Kate Raworth's donut model, on the outside of that ring is the ecological ceiling. So those are the natural carrying capacities of the Earth, of Earth systems. So climate change, biodiversity loss, land conversion, nitrogen and phosphorus are far outside of what the Earth could naturally replenish, absorb, renew, and circularly recycle into something healthy. So our planet is in a very unhealthy state. I think that's due to our civilizational blind spot. Why I'm bringing this in is that often when I'm meeting in organizations or meeting people about leadership, often this relationship to the global context is not often talked about, or is not, people are not relating to it, or organizations are not relating to it, and systems are not relating to it. So therefore, I think this is the challenge of leadership for our time, and it's the reason that I'm bringing it in. But also, I think it's also the unintended consequences of all the mental models, worldviews, and mindsets that we've adopted that inform our behavior. So when I was doing a little bit of prep for this presentation, I thought, what's Google tell us on Google Scholar tell us about how much actual knowledge and how much actual research has been done into leadership in a kind of rigorous, through a rigorous formal process, and how many articles are there about there. So last week was almost 5.5 million articles on Google referring to leadership. And then if you just put in leadership without the kind of academic requirement, it goes up to 1 billion. So I'm curious about what you might say that these figures illustrate might highlight or shine light on the blind spot of leadership. I can't see everybody, so if you might need to just speak up.
Probably everyone has a certain standardized curriculum on what sells as leadership, but never challenge the status quo or delve into uncertainty. We at the Gray Swan Guild have a brand new book called Uncertainty. So if you check it on Amazon, both digital and hard copy, that's what's delving into. So uncomfortable journeys, but most important of all, having a very broad spectrum, more of a planetary task force. So I guess that's why everyone is creating repetitive materials. Perhaps
So
that's your as well.
Standardized curriculum that doesn't reflect the current reality in some ways. That's a kind of one size fits all, you could say, or
that's most wonderfully put. So just standard, just pick up the signals that you should, certain thresholds, certain frequencies, and ignore the rest. And that's not reality. So if you're setting out SETI system to pick up signals from interplanetary and the heavens, there's a whole lot of heavens on this earth as well. Over.
Okay, thanks, Abhishek. Anybody else got a view on this?
Can I jump in on that, Dave?
Yeah, please. The huge investment in that these figures represent.
I am a failed PhD, so perhaps there's some bitterness in what I'm about to say.
Okay.
When I was doing my PhD, there were lots of academic papers I came across that talked about how flawed the academic system was. And there were several reasons given for it, but the ones that were most pertinent to my way of thinking were ones that were saying we're using research that is very focused on trying to prove things rather than trying to understand things.
Right.
That's my interpretation. That's not exactly how it was in the research. So that's my sort of how I've synthesized that. And I think when you look at academia, the whole game of academia is publish as much as possible. And I've asked several top professors at a range of universities and said, how do you make sure that what you're writing when you're getting published, that it's relevant to the business world? And literally every professor, and I'm not talking about PhDs or postdocs, I'm talking about tenured professors at very high caliber universities. And basically they all said to me unequivocally, we don't care, we only need to get published. They are absolutely not publishing with the intent of fostering understanding.
Okay.
So this, I think, is very much in line with, was it Basir who was saying this? I apologize if I got your name wrong.
No, it is accurate. Yes, Katerina,
Yeah.
thank you.
We're in a total misalignment. And I would say it happens in business too, where we're completely misaligned with improving situations, creating longer term outcomes. Yeah, I could go on forever because it's something that angers me so much. There's so much money that's being wasted on a bunch of people pontificating about things they genuinely do not care about.
Okay. I like that pithy critique there, Katerina. So I did a rehearsal with my wife yesterday and she said, don't be too critical. So I'm glad you've been that voice.
Let me play that role.
So thank you anyway. So yeah, I would say this points to a knowing doing gap, which is similar to what Katerina's saying, that we've studied a lot. We've got immense amount of knowledge and information, but that knowledge and information hasn't changed behavior. That doesn't necessarily automatically result in changed behavior. I was doing a similar presentation on leadership at university class in the Netherlands, and there was a group of 35 young people and one or two educators in there, and I said, what's your sense of leadership on the planet today? Is it fit for purpose? And not one single hand went up. So we're facing a epochal challenge here. We know that leadership's important, but our ways of really being it, living it, and representing it need a lot of development. So thanks for that, Katerina. I'm now going to move on to the next point. So when I was writing my master's dissertation, I came across this saying in 2010 or 2011. What shape should leadership take if we're living in unprecedented times? So this has really piqued my curiosity, and this is one of the reasons I still inquire and I'm still interested in this topic. So, and I think the times now in 2023, 13 years later, are quite arguably even more unprecedented than they were in 2010. So this is also a challenge for us as leadership promoters or followers or studiers or as leaders in organizations. So what form should leadership take if we're living in unprecedented times? So one thing that I haven't actually put the name on there, but this is a statement by Otto Scharmer, and he's pointing to leadership is in essence the capacity to shift the inner place from which we operate. So for the collective iceberg, there's also an individual iceberg, and the inner place from which we operate is the place of potential and transformative change. So the blind spot, we're not only blind collectively, we're also blind to the source dimension out of which effective leadership and social action come into being. So I'm not sure if I said this at the outset of the presentation, but one of my aims in advocating clarity on leadership is create clarity by shining light in the blind spot. I'm not trying to create a crystalline, pristine map for us to engage in, but more shining a light into the blind spot and sensing and feeling, and then also expressing what might be there, or what might lie there. So, and this is Sharma's model. If you can actually superimpose the iceberg on the U here, then you'll kind of get a slightly maybe clearer sense of what I'm talking to. But he talks about what are the causes, the three main causes of the civilizational moment that we're in, the epoch that we're in, the potential collapse or extinction we might be in or are heading towards. So one of the causes is this divide between self and nature. One where currently, not everybody, but we're currently still exploiting the natural resources of the earth, commanding and controlling it for our consumption and production and our industries to exploit and create profit from. So this divide from nature is destroying nature. There's a social divide between people, of which the kind of worst symptoms might be said to be the Republican Democrat divide in America, the polarization, the Brexit result, or the rise of fascism in places like Hungary and even now Italy. So the divides between self or self to other are really, really profound. And then the divide from self from spirituality, or self from this deeper sense of existence that lies at the bottom of the iceberg, that sense of my own existence being important. And then the potential symptoms of that are the mental health crisis we have in youth, and the general sense of burnout and loss of well-being in our workplaces. So these divides kind of explain some of this crisis. But if we look to the bottom of the model, and what Sharma talks about is one of the biggest shortfalls in the leadership capacities is seeing and acting from the whole. So seeing and acting from the whole system. And also, what I would add to this, that's not on the diagram, is this is about, if this is our individual iceberg that's going into the roots of our own existence, there's existential questions there. The existential question, who am I? What is my work? Or what are our questions of what's our purpose on the earth? Or what's the earth calling for? What does the cosmos need from us? These existential questions, or what is a good life? These existential questions are often unseen and untalked about, partly because they're not conscious, or we've already made conclusions and are cutting across the U, as it were, shortcutting to arrive at an end point. So, and if we think about sensing and acting from the whole, what we did in the beginning is I did this little exercise with you to sense your own wholeness, to sense you as a living system, to sense your sense of yourself that is an emergent property of all those complex factors that are you, all that biological processes, the mental processes, the emotional process, the psychic processes that make up you. So that you are a living expression of wholeness, even if there's maladaptations or illness. Generally, you survive if your system's working in a wholesome way consistently over time. Then we've got this notion of social self, or as somebody brought in about Ubuntu, this nested, not only are you a whole system yourself, but you're in a social system, you're nested in a social system. And that social system can be your work, be your family, can be your relatives, your hockey club, your pastimes. You're nested in multiple interacting complex social systems, and that's nested in the Earth system. So there's something about this ecological sensibility, this ecological sense of wholeness and whole functioning and self autopoetic, the autopoetic abilities of living systems are somehow, I would say, we don't appreciate them enough, and we're not living according to those natural principles, as it were, or in line with them. And that's part of the reason for this, the ecological crisis. So you are a nested system of wholeness. You connect with others in whole systems, and that's nested in the planet. So this is a kind of ecological construction of self, or representation of self. So why else is this first person perspective important? And that is partly represented in this statement by Bill O'Brien, who was the CEO of a big insurance company, very successful insurance company in America. And he posited that the success of the intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So that sense of I-ness, that sense of yourself, and many of the interesting observations that were shared in the round after the breakouts were referring to this to some degree. So the interior condition, so the self-compassion or the empathy for oneself in times of stress, or the ability to navigate unpleasant emotions and still use them creatively as a leader, was partly what was shared in the group that I was in. So if we take that and take that another step, the knowledge of the empowerment of self is ancient. It's not only come out through Western democracies, the Reformation, the end of religion, but the empowerment for the source has been the empowerment from the, I'd say, the bottom of the iceberg, has been known for millennia. And this is a statement you could think about Plato, Pythagoras, Aristotle, or Plotinus, or here is Lao Tzu, famous Chinese mystic. Knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom, mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. So if we take that pointer to the depth and extent of our own connection to the earth, this can give us confidence in some form of mastery, self-mastery. So we've talked about the blind spot of leadership, and I now want to draw your attention to the being of leadership. So part of my researches in my dissertation, I came upon this doctor called Wiley Suber, and he comes up with some interesting statements about leadership and leadership development, where he's saying that leading yourself is a prerequisite for leading others. So the notion of self-compassion or empathy, or of being able to read one's own signals and being able to not react or act out of them in a way, leading oneself, you might almost automatically become a leader for others. And he talks about what we tend to study in leadership, or have studied in leadership, and many of those in those papers that we're referring to, is to study the attributes but not of leaders, but not the fundamental structures of being. What does it make? How does being make it possible to be a leader in the first place? And that rather than leadership is not about knowledge or characteristics, it's also about when leadership becomes as lived in or lived through, it does grant access to its actual nature and essence. So this is a first person perspective on being a leader. And it's that I suggest to you gives you greater access to leadership in your own experience than necessarily acquiring the knowledge about leadership but not having applied it in any way. So also, Suba goes on to say, teaching about leadership does not actually create leaders, as probably many of you know, many that have been in this group. And what his critique is, it uses a third person approach to impart someone else's knowledge, which grants learners limited access to the being and actions of effective leaders. So this is David Day, who's here today. I asked him a question about the first person perspective, and he talked about the great man of leadership. They produce models, they produce books, they produce how-to manuals, and they're very charismatic, but there's certain dangers in following this third person, a third person perspective on leadership, because I think that in being too literal and following it uncritically, you miss out on activating your unique capacity for leadership that is your kind of DNA essence of your own leadership. So Suba goes on to say, using a phenomenological methodology provides direct access to what it means to be a leader. And I was interviewing a couple of people in my leadership dissertation that actually provided that. So just to recap what I was, my perspective on leadership is leadership isn't exclusively about position, role, earnings, status, job title, or talents. It's also not only about characteristics, traits, skills, know-how, know-what, competencies, outperforming goals, having and doing. These all have a role, but I think they've become too much of an exclusive focus without this almost like an extractive focus, without focusing on the inner nature of leadership and what it means to be a leader. So it's not long before I'm coming. Got a couple more offerings to you, and then we'll go into the breakout groups. So having studied everything that I've studied so far and everything that I've presented to you led me to this conclusion, that leadership is a phenomena and it's irreducible. So therefore, we might make efforts to analyze, extract, and work out patterns, but that doesn't provide access to leadership directly, as Suba's saying, but also I think that in trying not to reduce leadership to its components, we can cultivate a more humble attitude of wanting some end goal or end product. And that leads to, was mentioned in one of the feedbacks about reflection, inquiry, and having a tentative approach to the topic that could be more productive in the long run. And leadership is irreducible. I'm not going to read everything that's on the slide because I think I'm coming to the end of what I need to share. But I would offer to you that leadership is best embodied and exemplified. You create a ripple from your leadership behaviors that can't be quantified or analyzed. And it's that we can exemplify by deepening our essence and relationship to the source of leadership and accessing that in the blind spot. And because of all of these studies, I came up with one suggestion that I have less time to go into because I would love to move into the discussion phase. So I would offer to you that leadership is both art and practice. So to think of, if we look at the example, the stellar example of Pablo Casals, why did he continue to practice at age 90? Because I think I'm making progress. So if one of the greatest artists of our generation or recent times still seeks to improve, they're never at an endpoint. They recognize that the journey is always, you could say the path and the goal are one, or the journey is the reason to, is the journey itself is the journey of development. There's no real endpoint. So I think if we consider that leadership is irreducible in essence, we'll have a more tentative and humble approach and inquiring approach to the subject, but also consider ourselves improving our own leadership capacities incrementally and practicing this as more as an art and more as a musician or artist would. So, and just to end, what we looked at was the blind spot of leadership in some detail. And then I explored with you the first person perspective on leadership and the being of leadership. And then at the end, I've suggested to you that leadership is an irreducible phenomena, and leadership could be better considered as both an art and a practice. So I'm going to end the presentation there. I hope that wasn't too much talk in one go, that you got sufficient, could connect with it. I haven't been able to read the chat. There might be interesting things in there that I could scan, but what I think it would be, oops.
Dave, I think it was, it certainly primed lots of thoughts in me, which is probably your goal. So
Okay.
I think having some time to process them is exactly a great idea. I don't know what you were planning, but I'd almost like you to bring one or two of those slides up and on the screen, and then let us have the questions around.
Okay. Have you been monitoring the chat then, Tom, as well?
I have. Yes.
I couldn't do both things at once, so
I've been adding. Okay. I've been making my comments in the chat too.
Oh, okay.
One of them was that a couple of us think that you are related to Pablo Casals because you look very similar.
Oh, I love that connection. So what do you want me to bring up, Tom?
Any of them. I think it's just a way to focus maybe some of the feedback from the group and the questions. Your choice.
I like the slide about leadership as having and doing.
Okay, I'll bring that one up. I'll just bring the presentation up and go back there. Yeah. Was there something you wanted to ask about that or say about it?
No, I just thought it was a great place to start. There was some discussion in the chat about leadership and management and bureaucracy and all of that stuff. And I think it was tied a lot to maybe this slide about what you had spoken about to people when you were doing your PhD.
Yeah.
Or your dissertation, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't a PhD.
I'm sorry.
I'm not a failed PhD yet, but that might come in the future.
I'll just chime in here that I had made a comment on this one because I rightly or wrongly have a fairly more definitive position is on that first column. I'd say leadership is not at all position, role, earnings, status, job title, and talents. I don't think those things are bad. I just think they're a different thing.
Yeah.
They're about organizations and bureaucracies and those types of relationships, not about whether you're leading or not, or you're a leader or not. So that's my view.
Can I respond to that, Tom? That's
sure.
One of the reasons I'm engaged in the Prometheus forum is because one of your goals is to make leadership more common. And I think ownership in the from the first person perspective encourages that goal. And then also we were talking about democratizing leadership. One of the gentlemen fed that back. And then also, but the reason I put it in is because it's commonly confused and associated with it. Not that I believe that it has any importance. And I didn't say in terms of art and practice of leadership, I would say I echo Heifetz here, that if you care about something and you want to make positive change in the world, you are a de facto leader.
Yeah. Yes, or change in the world or change in the room that you're in, right? Wherever you see a possibility, if you choose to engage in some way to manifest that possibility, you're making a leadership choice, is what I'd say.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say leadership is not position role, and kind of hidden in there as some kind of anti-management, anti-power energy. I don't hold that. I just think it's misdirecting us when people conflate those two things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another interesting tension, because there's a movement towards flat management and self-managed organizations or shareholder managed organizations. And a lot of what's going on there is reactive to that, but actually you still need structure. And something like Hierocracy has more structure than many regular organizations. So I think there's an interesting tension if you're trying to lead an organization of the future between emergence and structure.
Interesting.
The other slide I really liked was the one by Bill O'Brien. I'm not sure who that is exactly, but I feel that there is some relevance here, especially when we're talking about personal leadership and the self and self. As you showed in Theory U, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. If we are all our own personal interveners and we can't really deal with our own selves, because I am a big fan of the show Alone. I don't know if any of you here watched the show Alone. It's a great show that's in its 10th iteration on the History Channel. And it's basically where people go out with their own cameras and they basically have to deal with themselves. That is a form of definite personal mastery or personal leadership. And I think that many of them fail because not even 2 or 3 days out there and they can't actually deal with themselves. And what does that have to say? What does that say about, if we can't deal with ourselves, what makes us think at all us dealing with other people? If we can't get ourselves under control, what makes us think in anyone's right mind that we can deal with others? And in a way that we can resolve conflict and, live in harmony. And we talk about things like interdependence and all these uncomfortable journeys. And one of the things that really rang true to me specifically, Dave, was what you said about this DNA essence of your own leadership. We teach leadership, we talk about leadership, we can hammer it into the ground, but really, what is our own DNA essence of us? If leadership is irreducible, what does that actually mean? And how does this quote tie in there? That's all.
Thanks for that, Tiffany. And that's my ongoing inquiry.
Yeah.
So sometimes insights arise, but I don't think there's a definitive answer.
I think Bashir has his hand up, and I just want to remind people that if you look at the reactions menu item, there's a raise hand, and you can raise your hand, and then that kind of puts you in the queue for making a comment.
It was a wonderful presentation, Dave. Very, very quick question. So what about the global leaders? You have Biden and then Xi Jinping and obviously running the world. So if you look at them as characters that you would have to analyze or as subjects, what are the clues that you see or what should we pay attention to? Thank you. From leadership analysis, behavioral analysis. I bet nobody asks such questions to you at the very, very strategic level, but definitely a lot of transactions and interpretation and analysis. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of what's going on at a planetary scale and what we're not doing. I'm kind of feel that Biden has been in the direction of sanity for the United States, and with his stimulation of the green economy. But I'm not studying for reasons that are in the presentation. I don't think they're necessarily. They may have leadership elements that is worth studying, but they don't attract me to study them. I'd rather study the pioneers like Nora Bateson or Daniel Christian Wall, or people that are active in the regenerative economy, that are engaging in the kind of activities that resonate with me and inspire me, whereas politics, I feel, is a bit of a burden. Although I think we do need a new sort of polis, a person-led, people-led grassroots polis. Tom.
Thank you, good sir.
Well, two things. One is follow up to Basir's comment, and where I think I also, we can have fun talking about global leaders and what we observe, but it really takes us off of this personal centered, what do I experience? What do I want to create in the world, and how am I reacting with the thing, the first person piece? But the other comment I was going to make, my thought on the Bill O'Brien slide was it's kind of a yes and slide with me, which I think is also an example of why there's so much stuff out there in the world, is that we want to make these single factored observations and pretend the world has only one part to it, where it has many. So a success of an intervention does depend on the interior condition of the inventor, but also the interior condition of the other inventors, and also the knowledge and skills and context of the other inventors. So it depends on a lot of things. This is one of them. And I just think we would all be served better if folks like this would be that specific and say the condition of the inventor is critical to the success of an intervention. Is not make it sound like it's the only thing.
Yeah. I don't know if it came across in this. I did try and qualify that by saying it's a component in a change initiative, because of course, if the organization doesn't want it, or the culture of the organization resists it, one person with a great interior condition isn't going to be enough, because you need a cohort of the willing.
Yeah, in a kind of a systemic collaborative view of who the intervener is, it's not one person making the linear impact on the world, right? It is by definition all of the co-intervening. So it's the co-interior experience. Sorry.
Thanks. Katerina, I think you're next. Well, on my screen anyway.
Thank you. I want to respond to what Basir asked, because I think it's really important, and it sort of goes into that question that I'm grappling with right now. What's the difference between leadership and management? And what I wrote in the chat earlier on is that I think leadership is influencing the invisible, and that incorporates a lot. Management is manipulating the measurable, the tangible, the stuff that we learn in MBA school, business school, the things that we're rewarded for at work, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is we have to have leadership and management together. The question is, how do we define them so we understand which role we're playing at the time? And I'm not using role in terms of how you used it. Because we really need both of these, the control piece and the emergence piece. And to me, the leadership is the emergence. And we then also need to add another axis or another dynamic. And I think this responds to Basir, which is there are people who are, and I used to work in the financial industry and the international capital markets in some of the biggest markets. And I can tell you the majority of the people that work there are extremely self-interested. They're there for their own wealth. And I mean, the stories that we're hearing from Credit Suisse and UBS, there's some really nasty stories that are coming out, but none of those were secrets, right? So we've always known that there's people who are 100% self-interested. Some are more aggressive. Some are willing to commit murder or whatever else to get as much power and wealth as they can. And then there's other people who are more the focus on the regenerative, the collective, how do we make the world a better place for all? So I don't know what that access would be, whether it's collective orientation versus self-orientation. I don't know what the right divide is there, but it's a different axis that doesn't necessarily relate to this management versus leadership question. I think that has to do more with purpose, alignment, lots of other words in there. Does that make sense to you, Basir? Does that respond to what you were, yeah?
That is wonderfully put. I mean, bankers serve their self-interest, but they also want to be on Santa's good list and not get the Krumpfen. I couldn't quite remember the exact name, but you do need the Krumpfen. And the Krumpfen is, I don't, what was the character that they scared the kids in Germany and in Austria? I forgot the name of the character, so my
Yeah.
apologies for mutilating the character. But obviously, the insurance companies, the underwriters, are that will keep that scorecard, because way back in 2014, everybody gets attacked, everybody gets robbed, but nobody goes out to say that we got robbed, we got mugged, our stuff is stolen, our data is corrupted, and so forth. And then I basically encourage getting more of the insurance companies involved to keep them honest. And so you do need a sheriff in town. Over. So thank you very much. Wonderful points, Katarina.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katarina. Robin?
Yeah, thank you. I want to acknowledge, Katarina, when you wrote that in the chat about management being visible and miserable and leadership being invisible, subtle, and nuanced, I did write it down. I think that's a really good breakdown of words that I've heard talked about before. But the thing that kind of stuck to me when we were going through this presentation was this, that leadership is seeing and acting on the whole. And then I wondered about, how do you define whole? Like, what does that mean? What whole are we acting on and seeing? And then do you have to be the inside or the outside of that whole to be successful in a leadership position? Does it matter?
Well, I think the first step is to develop a consciousness of the whole, because without it, you can't really respond to that. But also, when we look at how our, for example, in Great Britain, we've got Amazon, who don't pay any taxes. So somehow they have an office in Ireland, and all of their taxes are extracted or elsewhere. So there's something about, okay, that's an example of corporation extracting social capital and all kinds of other capitals, making a huge profit and not giving anything back. So firstly, I think there's a consciousness of the whole, and it's an open question about which is better, to be on the inside or the outside. Sometimes to be on the outside, you might have more objectivity, but on the inside, you might have more influence. So it depends. And I'm sure there's people in the room that have done a lot more consulting and nature-based work than I've actually done in this area. I've not been employed as a consultant, so I've not had to navigate that particular tension. I'm more or less seeing, apart from maybe B Corps and radical organizations, there's not many formulations of business that is incorporating all the capitals and trying to have a positive impact while making a profit. I would say that would be, for me, the ideal business model for the 21st century. Jose, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask something?
Not so much ask, and I'm not sure how to phrase it, because as I'm listening to everyone, I'm realizing that maybe the language issue is the biggest thing that I'm finding today. Because we talk about inside and outside, or we talk about emergence and nature, and there's so much of it feels like we're trying to put our finger on something that we can't quite label. And I think that thing that we can't label is nature itself, but we divide ourselves and our ideologies and our terminologies away from nature as if they're separate things.
Yeah.
And so then we then have a tough time sort of saying what that thing is. And I think we're all sort of party to that. I don't know how to say it otherwise. But it seems to me that everything we're talking about when it comes to sort of trying to get it inside us, and that it is who we are and what we're doing and who we are being that makes the difference. I would argue that us being us is us being nature. And that part of us that is nature is what we've lost connection with. And we've become bound to the ideological and the conceptual views of what's right and wrong, or what we should and shouldn't do. And that we have terminology around all of that confuses the very simple thing that we ourselves are nature. When we connect to that, we tend to do the right things. So that was what was bouncing around in my head there.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because in a way, as much as I'm sort of active on the fringes, my leadership programs are essentially about revealing that there's no difference. But I'm also grateful for you to pointing out that I don't know if you came in at the beginning, but I was talking about the presuppositions at the bottom of the iceberg that inform our behavior. So those binary bifurcations that are embedded in our language and way of seeing the world is coming from that blind spot as well. So exactly what you're pointing to. Welcome back, everybody. Is everybody back?
Yes, I think so. We lost maybe one other person.
Okay.
That was wonderful. I love being able to be in the group. I usually have to stand outside and be a manager.
A manager. Well, how terrible. So let's just go round and hear from each person something that you've found out today that's meaningful for you and you'll continue to explore from today's session. And would somebody like to go first and then nominate the next person, and we'll go around that way?
I could go.
Thanks, Rose.
So the last group, all the discussions were wonderful and fascinating. I just found it interesting. So I was with Jose and Jean-Pierre, and we're from different parts of the world, but it was so energizing and inspiring to listen to what we picked up in these discussions, and a lot of commonalities, but in that commonality there were strings of, okay, here's a path we could explore, and the discussion can continue. So thank you for orchestrating this. Thank you.
I think I'm glad that you've enjoyed it, but I think that's the setup, the genius of Prometheus, you might say. So yeah. Thanks, Rose.
Who's next, Rose?
How about David Day?
Thanks, Rose. I mean, one of the things that we talked a bit about in our breakout session that is running through my mind is the different perspectives, the values-based perspectives on leadership. A lot was said about leadership being irreducible, leadership being holistic, leadership being kind of a gestalt, which flies in the face of scientific values of, in order to study something, you have to kind of break it down into smaller elements to be able to measure that, manipulate them, and study them in using scientific methods. So, which is right. I don't think it is either or. I think it's, of course, and both an art and a science. But how can these two perspectives talk to each other more fruitfully, more constructively?
Thank you. Beautiful.
I will then nominate my good friend Tiffany from today, since we just met about an hour, 2 hours ago.
What a pleasure, David. I'm going to just speak about one thing that was shared in our breakout. To have an answer creates clarity. And perhaps that's a misnomer in itself. To have an answer doesn't necessarily create clarity. Yeah. And then a final thing there's 2 books, and how can we reconcile those 2 books into something that is, oh God, that would be so wonderful. Becoming a leader and becoming a human, or is it becoming a person? I'm not really sure. How can we actually, as a collective here, put those books into one? Wouldn't that be great? Man, that'd be great. And I'm going to pass the baton to Dr. Robin Odegaard.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany. You even said my whole name. How fancy. I appreciate that. So these kind of exercises are really fun for me. I have a podcast called Quick Hits. It's a four people, 10 minutes, one topic, and we attack some of these things, but only for 10 minutes at a time. So it's fun to be able to do this kind of protracted thought experiment with intellectually curious people. So I want to say thank you to each of you for that. One of the things that came up for me in this was the idea of morality in leadership. And we talked about, is leadership itself morally neutral? And then whether you take it in a different direction or not, that's on you as a human, whether it's good or bad. And I'm going to have to struggle with that a little bit, because then the question that came up with me is, can humans have morality without a religion, a heaven and a hell, a bigger being to make you be good? So that was a question that is written on my paper that I'm going to have to think about. Jose, I would love to hear from you next.
So what did I take away from today? I think I take away the fact that we all are trying to point at the same thing. We're all trying to discover how to make change in the world through a process of connecting with our nature. And that I loved what Jean, I cannot pronounce your name fully, said about Jean Delvier said about healing and the relationship between leadership and healing. And I think not just healing others, but healing ourselves. And that what we've done is lost our way, and coming back to ourselves is a process of healing. So I think that's a beautiful way to think about what we're talking about. I appreciate today and appreciate all you've done. I'm going to pass it on to Stephen.
Thank you, Jose. And I put my thumb up to that completely. I really enjoyed your perspective and your summation there. It's my first group, and I've just enjoyed the space and the different perspectives and the openness that people bring to this, because it can be a difficult and impenetrable thing that we're all pointing at. One of my passions is to make it really accessible, and I believe everyone, one of the other presenters talked about the overlap between leadership and being a leader and being a human, and I believe it's inherent in everyone, wherever they are, to be able to demonstrate it, to be able to practice, and to be able to do leadership or be leaderful. And so I take away a great, amazingly intellectual, exciting group of people, and I'll look forward to reflecting on all of this. There's so much to digest. I guess I'm like the worms in the compost, just sort of trying to compost on this. But thank you. And I should ask Jean Elvire to give her perspective, please.
You're on mute, John.
I put the book in the chat box, As a Leader, As a Healer. And I wanted to just add a layer. Wonderful presentation, Dave. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Leadership has different layers when you are not in the same culture. So I have been experiencing it myself, working with people in 5 continents, and also working with indigenous. So it's important to add things like humility, wisdom, and things like that. And that is why I added the aspect of healing, because we all have a trauma of any sort, and it is important to sometime go from there. So thank you.
Beautiful.
You're welcome.
I think Bashir and Mia is the last to go.
Maybe
I
David?
knew-
And maybe Tom.
And Tom. Bashir?
So I think I knew you had that instigator, really revolutionary dynamic in you, but I never thought you would basically toss things in such a way that, you know, I thought I knew a few things here and there. Now I have to go back and study. And actually, the sooner you post this video in its entirety, Tom, into the platform, the better. Morality came up considerably, and as to how we are governing ourselves. But just as I was going to bring up the Renaissance, saying if I can't move the heavens, I can certainly raise hells. Genevieve diffused the bomb by focusing on humility. So thank you for that. You know, that's a 180-degree change. And on Tiffany's, so I guess in a way, even though we were in separate rooms, our unconscious had a certain connection in the sense that what Tiffany and David said about the duality or tripality. One Turkish company that runs several airports, when their CEO delivered a leadership speech, he said, you know, we have all these corporate values, corporatism, corporate structure, corporate culture, but we also have what we call situationality. So whatever the situationality, I mean, not in a realistic perception sense, but there's always situationality that you really cannot codify. So I guess that's what David and Tiffany has captured, but also that's what's at the one of the dynamics in Dave's presentation and what everyone has been contributing. Thank you.
Tom?
Well, we're over, so I'll keep it really short, and I'll just say I'm feeling very good about the effort where we are in our effort to try to take this abstraction of leadership and be able to define its elements, so to speak, in a way. And I know that we're in the right spot when that set of elements is helpful in understanding who leaders are and what leaders do in the little micro case and in the big grand case and in any culture, because it should be a universal type of set of lenses. And as I listen to people's explorations here and even my own, I can see those stories in the way that we are thinking about offering that framework. And it's not a I like to say, I want to make sure most of the things in the leadership industry that cause all those all that stuff we started with is people own that framework and commercialize it. And our purpose is to curate it and not to commercialize, let others commercialize it. So it becomes, we don't have a conflict of interest in what it says. Anyway, that's what I'm feeling good about that.
Maybe I'll just make a couple of last statements, and then maybe you want to close, Tom. Just
I think why don't you make your statements and close us out, Dave?
Oh, okay then. Just thanks everybody for coming. I feel really enriched by your authentic, engaged explorations. What that does is give life to my own inquiry. So this sense that you can never come to the end of leadership, but it's an ongoing process of discovery, revelation, and disclosure is what I love. And so thanks so much for enriching my journey. I'm so pleased you came tonight. And also thanks for Tom for curating and hosting this with so much dedication. So thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon, evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Still morning.
Still morning. See you, Jose.